Hello. So today we are going to talk about domestic violence and traumatic brain injury. I'm going to go over some things that you as a physician may need to know. You might already know this, it might be a refresher. And I'm going to go over some common things between domestic violence and traumatic brain injury. And as this slide says, every minute 20 people are victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. It's not the same, but it is the same in terms of people being victimized by somebody that loves them or that's supposed to love them. And I worked in domestic violence for a little while, and the conception is that it's only women who are victims of domestic violence, and that's so not true. There are so many men that we used to help who were victims of domestic violence. The CDC does say that there are about 54,000 men who do seek medical help for an injury after being abused by their loved one, and it's about 270,000 women. So there is a difference, but men are still victims of domestic violence just as well. And speaking of seeking help, down here, this is a quote from the director of the ED from Providence Hospital in Washington, D.C. Physicians may actually be the only professional that individual sees when they do seek help. Isolation is one of the largest things that an abuser does to their victim. So that might be their only opportunity to say something. And a lot of people have reported that had they been asked, they would have actually disclosed that to that professional. So if you're not asking, you may want to think about asking. If you are, that's so physical abuse. Physical abuse is not the number one form of abuse for a victim or an abuser. However, a first of its kind community-based study from Ohio State University and the Ohio State Domestic Violence Network found that 81% of individuals who reported being abused were actually hit in the head not hit in the head, they sustained a brain injury due to their abuse. So it's very common, and traumatic brain injury and domestic violence have these same signs and symptoms. So you may have somebody with nausea, headaches, bruising, and substance abuse problems. But, where did that start? Did that start because of the domestic violence? Or did that start because of the traumatic brain injury? Or is one from one and one from the other? You might have to actually figure it out or work with this person. Hopefully you can work with them closely to try and help them through those symptoms. But the symptoms can look exactly the same. And then the same study found that 83% of individuals reported being strangled. And you as a physician know that depending on if that strangulation led to a loss of consciousness or not, you could then be talking about a different brain injury. You could be talking about strokes. It could be days later and they've got blood clots, they've got some arterial complications, they're not having respiratory issues. And if this is an individual that has been in a pattern of abuse previously, or that they are now, and now they're coming in, their voice has changed, they're having breathing problems, they keep coming in because they got a sore throat, or they're having swallowing issues. Now you can ask that question like, hey, has this moved? Are you being strangled now? And I know that would be a hard question to ask. However, when an abuser moves to strangulation, that is not that it's not serious in any situation, but it's extremely serious because now that individual is seeing how much that person can take before they lose consciousness or before they actually kill that person. So you want to be really mindful if you see any noticeable changes, or even if they tell you, because it could really be life-threatening. Not that the abuse isn't the physical abuse, but this goes to a different level. And we used to hear about strangulation all the time in the center that I worked in, and it's very scary. And then one of the problems is, they report blows to the head, 50% of women. And that is because, if you're punch somebody in the head, you can't see. Like, you have a hairline, you can't see those bruises. CTE, you're repeatedly hit in the head. You seriously could develop CTE, and there's actually studies out there now that are looking at this. And having symptoms longer than 3 months, normally with a concussion or traumatic brain injury, and I say normally, and that depends on the person, the situation, their injury, symptoms are not going to go beyond a month. And if they do, it's not, 3 months is significant for a concussion or a mild brain injury. So that's pretty, that's something that they might not understand, that they're still having the symptoms, and you as a physician might have to figure out why. Are they still being abused, or is this just from that one isolated incident? Usually it's probably not an isolated incident. And then domestic violence is not only cause but a consequence. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. Oh, and keeping appointments and following through. A lot of people are like, why don't these people get out? Why can't they come to the appointment? Man, they didn't show up to that appointment again today. They might not remember. They might be having some of those memory problems. The task might be too complicated for them, especially if they live in a large area and they have to commute. If they've got to take the bus system or they've got to take the train, it may be extremely difficult for them to get up, moving, motivated. They might have that depression where they just can't get out of bed that day. So it's not that they don't want help and they don't want to follow through, but if they've had a brain injury and they're a victim of domestic violence and you pile those symptoms on top of each other, they may not be able to follow through with much. And mental health, like I just said, depression, anxiety, I can't imagine that depression would not. We also know that brain injury can cause, some depression and anxiety from that chemical change that happens. Substance abuse can actually make the abuse worse if the abuser is using substances or alcohol. And also, if that individual has to be hospitalized and they are discharged with a prescription for an opioid, we know that up to a year and longer in some situations, people are more susceptible to developing a substance use disorder after a brain injury. And a lot of times also brain injuries do happen under opioid or substance abuse problem. And PTSD. PTSD is another one of those traumatic brain injury and PTSD. They already call the perfect storm because the symptoms overlap. They have the same symptoms, but they look different. So if you throw domestic violence on top of that, I can't imagine people not having PTSD from being in one of those severe domestic violence situations. And then studies also show that people with traumatic brain injury and PTSD are also more likely to abuse their partner. So if you're in a domestic violence situation and you are more likely to now develop a pattern of abuse within your next relationship or within your children or somebody that you're caring for, and now you have PTSD, it could become very serious very quick. You could now become the situation that you were trying to get yourself out of. And homelessness, again, when I worked with this population, that was the reality for a lot of people to actually get away from their abuser. You go into a homeless situation or you stay because you have no financial income. You've got, they've controlled every part of your life. And then, like before, you may already be doing this. And if you're not, you may want to start. This is helps. It is a guide to screening people who come into your office or the facility that you work in, to ask them. You know, I know every time I go to my doctor, they ask me, do you feel safe at home? Are you okay? And if they say no, you can ask these questions like, have you been hit in the head? Did you see a physician? You might be the physician that they're seeing after that appointment. And are you experiencing any signs and symptoms? If you don't have anything like this, the link for this resource is in the description for this video below, so you can download it. And signs and symptoms, the link is in the video below for this also. This is BrainLink Signs and Symptoms for Adults resource, whatever you want to call it. And it has the danger signs, it has things to look for, it has signs and symptoms that people might not think of when they think of domestic violence and traumatic brain injury, because these individuals might not really understand the trauma that's happening when they get hit in the head. So they might look at this and then realize, hey, wait a minute, this is, you know, I'm not just getting hit in the head, I'm getting a brain injury. And they may be able to take this with them, they may not. They might have to take a picture of it on their phone, or you can always give them our website or the link below, as I said, and they can download it or look at it if they need to. And then you can also give them the links for these resources. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, they can call it, or they can go online. DomesticShelters.org, if they put in the zip code, they can shelter. And then the CDC has some great resources for domestic violence and traumatic brain injury. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you subscribe to our channel, you will always know when new resources and new videos are coming out. And I hope that you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you later. Thank you. Bye.